Saturday. It was very early on Saturday morning, on the last day of the world, and the sky was redder than blood. The International Express delivery man rounded the corner at a careful 35 miles an hour, shifted down to second, and pulled up on the grass verge. He got out of the van and immediately threw himself into a ditch to avoid an oncoming lorry that had barreled around the bend at something well in excess of 80 miles an hour. He got up, picked up his glasses, put them back on, retrieved his parcel and clipboard, brushed the grass and mud from his uniform, and, as an afterthought, shook his fist at the rapidly diminishing lorry. "Shouldn't be allowed. Bloody lorries. No respect for other road users. What I always say is remember that without a collar, son, you're just a pedestrian too." He climbed down the grassy verge, clambered over a low fence, and found himself beside the River Uck. The International Express delivery man walked along the banks of the river, holding the parcel. Farther down the river bank sat a young man dressed all in white. He was the only person in sight. His hair was white, his skin chalk pale, and he sat and stared up and down the river as though he was admiring the view. He looked like how Victorian romantic poets looked, just before the consumption and drug abuse really started to cut it. The International Express man couldn't understand it. I mean, in the old days, it wasn't that long ago really, there had been an angler every dozen yards along the bank. Children had played there. Courting couples had come to listen to the splish and gurgle of the river, and to hold hands, and to get all lovey-dovey in the Sussex sunset. He'd done that with Maud, his missus, before they were married. They'd come here to spoon, and on one memorable occasion, fork. Times change, reflected the delivery man. Now, white and brown sculptures of foam and sludge drifted serenely down the river, often covering it for yards at a stretch, and where the surface of the water was visible, it was covered with a molecules-thin petrochemical sheen. There was a loud whirring as a couple of geese, thankful to be back in England again after the long, exhausting flight over the northern Atlantic, landed in the rainbow-slicked water and sank without a trace. Funny old world, thought the delivery man. Here's the Uck. Used to be the prettiest river in this part of the world, and now it's just a glorified industrial sewer. The swans sink to the bottom, and the fishes float to the top. Well, that's progress for you. You can't stop progress. He had reached the man in white. "Excuse me, sir. Party name of Chalky?" The man in white nodded, said nothing. He continued to gaze out at the river, following an impressive sludge and foam sculpture with his eyes. "So beautiful," he whispered. "It's all so damn beautiful." The delivery man found himself temporarily devoid of words. Then his automatic systems cut in. "It's funny old world, isn't it? And no mistake, I mean, you go all over the world delivering, and then here you are, practically in your own home, so to speak. And I mean, I was born and bred round here, sir, and I've been to the Mediterranean and to Des Moines, and that's in America, sir. And now, here I am, and here's your parcel, sir." Party, name of Chalky, took the parcel, and took the clipboard, and signed for the parcel. The pen developed a leak as he did, and so his signature obliterated itself as it was written. It was a long word, and it began with a P, and then there was a splodge, and then it ended in something that might have been ants, and might have been ocean. "Much obliged, sir," said the delivery man. He walked back along the river, back towards the busy road, where he had left his van, trying not to look at the river as he went. Behind him, the man in white opened the parcel. In it was a crown, a circlet of white metal set with diamonds. He gazed at it for some seconds with satisfaction, then put it on. It glinted in the light of the rising sun. Then the tarnish, which had begun to suffuse its silver surface when his fingers touched it, spread to cover it completely, and the crown went black. White stood up. "There's one thing you can say for air pollution. You get utterly amazing sunrises." It looked like someone had set fire to the sky. And a careful match would have set fire to the river, but alas, there was no time for that now. In his mind, he knew where the four of them would be meeting, and when, and he was going to have to hurry to be there by this afternoon. "Perhaps we will set fire to the sky," he thought, and he left that place, almost imperceptibly. It was nearly time. The delivery man had left his van on the grass verge by the dual carriageway. He walked around to the driver's side, carefully, because other cars and lorries were still rocketing around the bend, reached in through the open window, and took the schedule from the dashboard. Only one more delivery to make, then. He read the instructions on the delivery voucher carefully. He read them again, paying particular attention to the address and the message. The address was one word: everywhere. Then, with his leaking pen, he wrote a brief note to Maud, his wife. It read simply, "I love you." Then he put the schedule back on the dashboard, looked left, looked right, looked left again, and began to walk purposefully across the road. He was halfway across when a German juggernaut came around the corner, its driver crazed on caffeine, little white pills, and EEC transport regulations. He watched its receding bulk. "Core," he thought, "that one nearly had me." Then he looked down in the gutter. "Oh," he thought. "Yes," agreed a voice from behind his left shoulder, or at least from behind the memory of his left shoulder. The delivery man turned and looked and saw. At first, he couldn't find the words, couldn't find anything, and then the habits of a working lifetime took over, and he said, "Message for you, sir." "For me?" "Yes, sir." He wished he still had a throat. He could have swallowed if he still had a throat. "No package, sir. I'm afraid, sir, it's a message." "Deliver it, then." "It's this, sir. Come and see." Finally! There was a grin on its face, but then, given the face, there couldn't have been anything else. "Thank you," it continued. "I must commend you for your devotion to duty." "Sir?" The late delivery man was falling through a gray mist, and all he could see were two spots of blue that might have been eyes and might have been distant stars. "Don't think of it as dying," said Death. "Just think of it as leaving early to avoid the rush." The delivery man had a brief moment to wonder whether his new companion was making a joke, and to decide he wasn't. And then there was nothing. Red sky in the morning. It was going to rain. Yes. Witchfinder Sergeant Shadwell stood back with his head on one side. "Right then," he said. "You're all ready? Have you got it all?" "Yes, sir." "Pendulum of Discovery?" "Pendulum of Discovery? Yes." "Thumbscrew?" Newt swallowed and patted a pocket. "Thumbscrew," he said. "Firelighters?" "I really think, Sergeant, that firelighters—" "Firelighters," said Newt sadly. "And matches." "Bell, book, and candle?" Newt patted another pocket. It contained a paper bag, inside which was a small bell of the sort that maddens budgerigers, a pink candle of the birthday cake persuasion, and a tiny book called Prayers for Little Hands. Shadwell had impressed upon him that, although witches were the primary target, a good witchfinder should never pass up the chance to do a quick exorcism, and should have his field kit with him at all times. "Bell, book, and candle," said Newt. "Pin?" "Pin." "Good lad, never forget your pin. It's the bayonet in your artillery of light." Shadwell stood back. Newt noticed with amazement that the old man's eyes had misted over. "I wish I was going with ye," he said. "Of course, this won't be anything, but it'd be good to get out and about again. It's a trying life, you can, all this lying in the wet bracken, spying on their devilish dancing. It gets to your bones, something cruel." He straightened up and saluted. "Off you go then, Private Pulsifer. May the armies of glorification march with ye." After Newt had driven off, Shadwell thought of something that he'd never had the chance to do before. What he needed now was a pin. Not a military-issue pin which is for the use of, just an ordinary pin, such as you might stick in a map. The map was on the wall. It was old. It didn't show Milton Keynes. It didn't show Harlow. It barely showed Manchester and Birmingham. It had been the Army's HQ map for 300 years. There were a few pins in it still, mainly in Yorkshire and Lancashire, and a few in Essex, but they were almost rusted through. Elsewhere were mere brown stubs, indicated the distant missions of a long-ago witchfinder. Shadwell finally found a pin among the debris in an ashtray. He breathed on it, polished it to a shine, squinted at it, the map, until he located Tadfield, and triumphantly rammed the pin home. It gleamed. Shadwell took a step backward and saluted again. There were tears in his eyes. Then he did a smart-about turn and saluted the display cabinet. It was old and battered, and the glass was broken, but in a way it was the W.A. It contained the regimental silver, the inter-battalion golf trophy, not competed for, alas, in 70 years. It contained the patent muzzle-loading thunder gun of Witchfinder Colonel, "Ye shall not eat any living thing with the blood, neither shall ye use enchantment nor observe time's dalrymple." It contained a display of what were apparently walnuts, but were in reality a collection of shrunken headhunter heads donated by Witchfinder CSM Horace, get 'em afore they get you, Narker, who traveled widely in foreign parts. It contained memories. Shadwell blew his nose noisily on his sleeve. Then he opened a tin of condensed milk for breakfast. If the armies of glorification had tried to march with Newt, bits of them would have dropped off. This is because, apart from Newt and Shadwell, they had been dead for quite a long time. It was a mistake to think of Shadwell. Newt had never found out if he had a first name, as a lone nut. It was just that all the others were dead, in most cases for several hundred years. Once the army had been as big as it currently appeared in Shadwell's creatively edited bookkeeping. Newt had been surprised to find out that the Witchfinder army had antecedents as long and almost as bloody as its more mundane counterpart. The rates of pay for witchfinders had last been set by Oliver Cromwell, and never reviewed. Officers got a crown, and the general got a sovereign. It was just an honorarium, of course, because he got 9 pence per witch found, and first pick of their property. You really got to rely on those 9 pences, and so times had been a bit hard before Shadwell had got on the payroll of heaven and hell. Newt's pay was 1 old shilling per year. In return for this, he was charged to keep glimmer, firelock, firebox, tinderbox, or igniferous matches about his person at all times, although Shadwell indicated that a Ronson gas lighter would do very well. Shadwell had accepted the invention of the patent cigarette lighter in the same way that conventional soldiers welcomed the repeating rifle. The way Newt looked at it, it was like being in one of those organizations like the Sealed Knot, or those people who kept on fighting the American Civil War. It got you out on weekends and bet that you were keeping alive fine old traditions that have made Western civilization what it was today. An hour after leaving the headquarters, Newt pulled into a lay-by and rummaged in the box on the passenger seat. Then he opened the car window, using a pair of pliers for the purpose, since the handle had long since fallen off. The packet of firelighters was sent whinging over the hedge. A moment later, the thumbscrew followed it. He debated about the rest of the stuff, and then put it back in the box. The pin was Witchfinder military issue, with a good ebony knob on it, like a lady's hat pin. He knew what it was for. He'd done quite a lot of reading. Shadwell had piled him up with pamphlets on that first meeting, but the army had also accumulated various books and documents, which Newt suspected would have been worth a fortune if they ever hit market. The pin was to jab suspects. If there was a spot on their body where they didn't feel anything, they were a witch. Simple. Some of the fraudulent witchfinders used special retracting pins, but this one was honest, solid steel. He wouldn't be able to look old Shadwell in the face if he threw away the pin. Besides, it was probably bad luck. He started the engine and resumed his journey. Newt's car was a wasabi. He called it Nick Turbin, in the hope that someday someone would ask him why. It would be a very accurate historian who could pinpoint the precise day when the Japanese changed from being fiendish automatons who copied everything from the West to becoming skilled and cunning engineers who would leave the West standing. But the wasabi had been designed on that one confused day and combined the traditional bad points of most Western cars with a host of innovative disasters, the avoidance of which made firms like Honda and Toyota what they were today. Newt had never actually seen another one on the road, despite his best efforts. For years, and without much conviction, he'd enthused his friends about its economy and efficiency, in the desperate hope that one of them might buy one, because misery loves company. In vain did he point out its 823cc engine, its 3-speed gearbox, its incredible safety devices, like the balloons which inflated on dangerous occasions, such as when you were doing 45 miles an hour on a straight, dry road, but were about to crash because a huge safety balloon had just obscured the view. He'd also waxed slightly lyrical about the Korean-made radio, which picked up Radio Pyongyang incredibly well, and the simulated electronic voice which warned you not about wearing a seatbelt even when you were, it had only been programmed by someone who not only didn't understand English, but didn't understand Japanese either. It was state-of-the-art, he said. The art in this case was probably pottery. His friends nodded and agreed, and privately decided that if it ever came to buying a wasabi or walking, they'd come to invest in a pair of shoes. It came to the same thing anyway, since one reason for the wasabi's incredible MPG was the fact that it spent a lot of time waiting in garages while crankshafts and things were in the post from the world's only surviving wasabi agent in Nigirazushi, Japan. In that vague, zen-like trance in which most people drive, Newt found himself wondering exactly how you used the pin. Did you say, "I've got a pin and I'm not afraid to use it. Have pin will travel. The pin slinger, the man with the golden pin, the pins of Navarone." It might have interested Newt to know that of the 39,000 women tested with the pin during the centuries of witch hunting, 30,000 said, "Ouch." 9,999 didn't feel anything because of the use of the aforesaid retractable pins, and one witch declared that it had miraculously cleared up the arthritis in her leg. Her name was Agnes Nutter, and she was the Witchfinder Army's greatest failure. One of the early entries in the Nice and Accurate Prophecies concerned Agnes Nutter's own death. The English, by and large, being a crass and indolent race, were not as keen on burning women as other countries in Europe. In Germany, the bonfires were built and burned with regular Teutonic thoroughness. Even the pious Scots, locked throughout history in a long drawn-out battle with their arch-enemies, the Scots, managed a few burnings to while away the long winter evenings. But the English never seemed to have the heart for it. One reason for this may have to do with the manner of Agnes Nutter's death, which more or less marked the end of the serious witch-hunting craze in England. A howling mob, reduced to utter fury by her habit of going around being intelligent and curing people, arrived at her house one April evening to find her sitting with her coat on, waiting for them. "You're tardy," she said to them. "I should have been aflame 10 minutes since." Then she got up and hobbled slowly through the suddenly silent crowd out of the cottage and to the bonfire that had been hastily thrown together on the village green. Legend says that she climbed awkwardly onto the pyre and thrust her arms behind her on the stake behind her. "Tired well," she said to the astonished witchfinder. And then, as the villagers sidled toward the pyre, she raised her handsome head in the firelight and said, "Gather ye close, right close, good people. Come close until the fire near scorch ye. For I charge ye that all must see how the last true witch in England dies. For witch I am, for so I am judged, yet I know not what my true crime may be. And therefore let mine death be a message to the world. Gather ye right close, I say, and mark well the fate of all who meddle with such as they do not understand." And apparently she smiled and looked up to the sky over the village and added, "And that goes for you as well, you daft old fool." And after that strange blasphemy, she said no more, She let them gag her and stood imperiously as the torches were put to the dry wood. The crowd grew nearer, one or two of its members a little uncertain as to whether they'd done the right thing now that they came to think of it. 30 seconds later, an explosion took out the entire village green, scythed the valley clean of every living thing, and was seen as far away as Halifax. There was much subsequent debate as to whether this had been sent by God or by Satan, but a note later found in Agnes Nutter's cottage indicated that any divine or devilish intervention had been materially helped by the contents of Agnes's petticoats, wherein she had with some foresight concealed 80 pounds of gunpowder and 40 pounds of roofing nails. What Agnes also left behind on the kitchen table, beside a note cancelling the milk, was a box and a book. There were specific instructions as to what should be done with the box, and equally specific instructions about what should be done with the book. It was to be sent to Agnes's son, John Device. The people who found it, who were from the other village, and had been woken up by the explosion, considered ignoring the instructions and just burning the cottage, and then looked around at the twinkling fires and nail-studded wreckage and decided not to. Besides, Agnes's note included painfully precise predictions about what would happen to people who did not carry out her orders. The man who put the torch to Agnes Nutter was a witch-finder major. They found his hat in a tree 2 miles away. His name, stitched inside on a fairly large piece of tape, was "Thou shalt not commit adultery, Pulsifer," one of England's most assiduous witch-finders, and it might have afforded him some satisfaction to know that his last surviving descendant was now, even if unawares, headed toward Agnes Nutter's last surviving descendant. He might have felt that some ancient revenge was at last going to be discharged. If he'd known what was actually going to happen when that descendant met her, he would have turned in his grave, except that he never had got one.